Accused of stealing, a student stayed calm. The twist left everyone speechless. The afternoon sun stretched long golden beams across the public park, warming the paths and painting the grass with a soft glow. It was one of those days where the air felt calm, almost like the world itself was exhaling. Children's laughter echoed faintly from the playground at the far end, their voices mixing with the rhythmic creak of swings and the occasional squeal of delight. Somewhere closer, footsteps crunched lightly over gravel paths, pairs of students in hushed conversations, passing through on their way home. The trees swayed gently, their leaves whispering to one another in the breeze, carrying the scent of earth and distant flowers. The park sat between the university and the main road, a resting place for tired minds and hurried feet. That day, it was neither crowded nor empty, just enough life around to make the silence feel safe. A few elderly couples sat on benches, some holding hands, some quietly watching the world pass by. Joggers traced their familiar routes, earbuds tucked in, their movements blending with the gentle rhythm of the afternoon. Through this setting walked a young black student, no more than 20, moving with the quiet tiredness of someone who had just finished a long day of classes. He carried a stack of books in one hand, their edges pressing faint marks into his fingers, while his backpack hung loosely from one shoulder, swaying slightly with every step. His clothes were simple, nothing that stood out, nothing meant to draw attention, yet his presence carried a kind of steady calm. He moved at an unhurried pace, letting the sun warm his face as he passed through the park's stone pathway. Every few steps, he adjusted the books in his arm to keep them from slipping. His eyes were half-focused, lingering on the play of sunlight on the grass, then drifting to the sound of laughter nearby, as if the ordinary details of the day were guiding his thoughts into a slower rhythm. There was a gentleness to the way he walked, like he was at ease with the world around him. The curve of his mouth hinted at a faint smile, not the kind that bursts out from joy, but the kind that rests quietly, born from simple peace. A moment of stillness, after hours of lectures and crowded hallways, after the constant pull of assignments and deadlines. Yet, beneath that calm surface, there was something thoughtful about him. He seemed the sort who noticed details others might miss, the way sunlight filtered through the trees, the way a sparrow hopped along the edge of the path, pecking at unseen crumbs, the way people's expressions shifted as they passed by. His gaze was not hurried, not distracted by a phone screen or the rush of time, but grounded in the present. As he reached the center of the park, he shifted his books again, gripping them tighter. The faint hum of traffic from the road beyond. The trees seeped into the background, mixing with the softer, more human sounds of the park. The moment carried a stillness that felt almost fragile, like the world had paused briefly just to let him breathe. To anyone watching, he was just another student heading home, blending seamlessly into the flow of life around him. But within this ordinary scene, the smallest shift was waiting, a quiet, unremarkable detail that would soon pull him into a moment that neither he nor the people around him could have anticipated, because sometimes it is in the most peaceful afternoons, in the simplest steps home, that fate chooses to place its unexpected tests. As the young student walked deeper into the park, his steps found a slower rhythm. The sunlight filtered through the canopy, scattering golden specks across the stone pathway. He shifted the books in his hand again, careful not to drop them, when something unusual caught his eye. Just ahead, near the leg of a weathered wooden bench, a dark shape broke the harmony of scattered leaves and dust. It wasn't large, easily missed if someone wasn't paying attention, but its edges looked too straight, too deliberate, to belong in nature. His brow furrowed. He slowed down. Drawing closer, he saw it clearly, a wallet. Dark leather, worn at the corners, half buried beneath a layer of dry leaves. It looked as though someone had dropped it hastily and walked on, unaware it had slipped from their pocket. The student stopped in his tracks, his gaze fixed on the object. There was a brief moment of hesitation, He glanced left, then right. The path wasn't empty. An elderly man sat a few benches away, feeding crumbs to the birds. A pair of students laughed softly as they passed by on the far side. Yet no one else seemed to notice the wallet. He bent down slowly, balancing his books against his knee, and picked it up with care. Dust clung to its edges, smudging his fingertips as he brushed it off. The leather was warm from the sun, though. Slightly cracked, carrying the faint smell of age. It wasn't just a wallet, it felt heavy, as though holding more than the usual coins and cards. Curiosity stirred in him, though it wasn't the greedy kind. It was the kind that came with responsibility. The kind that asked, who did this belong to? Were they searching for it right now? Were they panicking over what was inside? He turned the wallet over in his hands, pressing the fold open with deliberate slowness. The first thing he noticed was the thick bundle of cash tucked neatly in its compartment. Crisp bills layered tightly, enough to make anyone's eyes widen. His chest rose with a sharper breath, not from desire, but from the undeniable realization of how much value was resting in his palm. Next came the shiny glint of credit cards, several of them, aligned with almost obsessive order. The embossed letters revealed a name, though he didn't read it out loud. Names carried weight, and this one belonged to a stranger whose story he had only brushed against by chance. But it was the final item that stilled him most. A folded note, tucked carefully behind the cash. He pulled it out, unfolding the creased paper with gentle fingers. The handwriting was hurried, slightly messy, but legible. Just a few lines, written with a sense of urgency. Though he only skimmed, the words hinted at something deeply personal, something about family, about responsibility, about love. The note wasn't for him, but it whispered the wallet's importance more loudly than the money ever could. His heartbeat quickened. He closed the wallet again, pressing it shut as though sealing away a secret. For a moment, he stood frozen, the sounds of the park fading to a distant hum. It wasn't temptation that filled him. It wasn't the thought of what the money could buy or the cards could unlock. Instead, it was the sheer weight of what he now carried. The trust of a stranger, the vulnerability of a life momentarily misplaced. A voice inside whispered that his choice mattered. That even though no one had seen him pick it up, even though no one might ever know what he decided, this small moment could define him more than 1,000 words ever could. The student tightened his grip, the leather firm against his palm. Around him, the world continued without pause, the rustle of trees, the chatter of people, the laughter of children. Yet within his chest, time felt slower, heavier. He had stumbled upon more than just a wallet. He had stumbled upon a test of character, and in that instant, standing in the quiet glow of afternoon, he knew this was no ordinary find. This was a responsibility he could not ignore. The wallet rested firmly in his hand as he adjusted his grip on the books tucked under his arm. For a brief second, he considered sitting on the bench and waiting, perhaps hoping its owner would come rushing back down the path. But as he lifted his gaze, he felt it, the shift in the air, subtle at first, then sharper, heavier. Eyes. A few strangers had noticed him standing there with the wallet. The elderly man who had been feeding birds paused, his crumbs frozen in midair, his eyes narrowing just slightly. A jogger slowed her pace as she passed, her head tilting to the side as if taking mental note of the scene. A pair of students walking by, young, loud, carefree just moments ago, suddenly quieted, their voices dropping into a low whisper. He caught the way their eyes flicked to the wallet, then to him, then back again. A fleeting glance, but waited. With meaning, he took a step forward, then another. The gravel crunched under his shoes, but behind him, the whispers seemed to grow. He didn't hear the words exactly, but he didn't need to. He knew them already, the unspoken script etched into 1,000 moments of prejudice. He won't give it back. He's probably thinking about the money right now. Look at him, he'll pocket it. The student's chest tightened, a faint pressure rising against his ribs. It wasn't the weight of the wallet pressing against his palm, but the weight of their suspicion, their eyes, their judgment. Each stare burned hotter than the afternoon sun. He wanted to speak, to tell them the truth, that he had no intention of keeping what wasn't his, that he was already planning to take it to the proper place. But the words lodged in his throat, heavy and unnecessary. Why should he have to explain honesty? Why should his silence be taken as guilt? Instead, he lowered his eyes, focusing on the path ahead. His steps remained steady, measured, refusing to betray the storm of thoughts beneath the calm surface. He adjusted his books again, gripping them tightly, as though the ordinary act of holding onto them could anchor him against the tide of silent accusations. A child's ball rolled near his feet, breaking his focus for a moment. The boy who chased. After it looked up at him, his eyes wide, innocent, unclouded by suspicion. The boy simply smiled, grabbed the ball, and ran back to his game. The contrast stung more than the whispers, the purity of trust in the child's eyes against the quiet judgment of the adults. The student exhaled slowly. He would not let their doubts dictate his actions. He would not let their suspicion taint the responsibility he now carried. The wallet was not his, it never was. And no amount of side glances or whispers would change that. So he kept walking, instead of sliding the wallet into his pocket, instead of hiding it under his books, he carried it openly in his hand, visible for all to see. Each step forward was deliberate, steady, toward the busier part of the park where more people gathered, where the path spilled onto the main street lined with cafes and shops. His pace did not quicken, though he could feel the unease behind him, the lingering eyes still watching his back. He did not turn around, did not justify himself, did not bow to the invisible weight pressing down on him. Inside, his heart beat faster, not from guilt, not from greed, but from the sting of being doubted before a word was even spoken. A familiar sting, one he had known in other shapes and forms, yet it still pierced sharply now. Still, he walked on. The sound of his shoes against gravel was steady, unbroken. Step by step, he carried not just the wallet, but the quiet resolve that honesty needed no announcement, no defense. It needed only to be lived. And so, in the midst of whispers and distrust, the young student chose silence, not the silence of guilt, but the silence of dignity. The student's steps carried him closer to the busier stretch of the park, his hand still firmly holding the wallet. The murmur of voices thickened here, friends gathering near the fountain, couples strolling, street musicians letting notes of a guitar float across the afternoon air. He thought, for a brief moment, that perhaps he could quietly slip into the administration office beyond the park gates and hand the wallet over. That would be the simplest thing. That would end it. Fate rarely chooses the simplest path. A sudden commotion broke through the calm. A man came rushing down the path, his face flushed crimson, his shirt sticking to him with sweat. His chest rose and fell in sharp bursts as though he had been running for blocks. His eyes darted left and right with a wild, frantic urgency, scanning every corner until they landed squarely on the student. And then, without hesitation, his voice cracked the air. "That's mine," he shouted, pointing with a trembling finger. "You were trying to steal it." The sound sliced through the chatter of the crowd like glass shattering on stone. Conversations died mid-sentence. Laughter drained from the air. Even the guitar stopped mid-chord. Every head turned. The student froze where he stood. The wallet was still in his hand, unopened, its edges pressing against his palm. The accusation hung in the air like a sudden storm cloud, heavy and electric. He didn't flinch. He didn't rush to defend himself. Instead, he simply stood there quiet, unmoving, the sunlight glinting off the smooth leather in his hand. His silence seemed to confuse some, confirm others. The whispers from before now grew into sharp breaths, soft gasps, murmured judgments, He has it in his hand. Of course, I knew it. Caught red-handed. The man who had shouted stormed. Closer, his face twisted with panic and anger. His hand twitched as though he might snatch the wallet away right there, and then give it back. You thought you could run off with it, didn't you? His voice cracked again, too loud, too accusing, leaving no space for reason. The student's heart pounded, but not with fear, rather with the sting of injustice. Still, he did not raise his voice. Instead, he lifted the wallet slightly, as though to show the crowd. His eyes, calm yet firm, swept briefly over the faces surrounding him. Faces hungry for confirmation. Faces waiting for proof. Then, with steady hands, he opened the wallet. The sound was small, just the faint creak of leather unfolding. Yet in the silence that gripped the park, it rang louder than the man's shout. Slowly, deliberately, he revealed the contents. Bundles of cash untouched. Credit cards lined neatly, none disturbed. And the folded note, still tucked exactly where it had been. Every bill, every card, every piece still inside. Nothing missing. Nothing claimed. The crowd leaned forward, eyes narrowing, breaths caught in their throats. A hush fell so thick it seemed even the trees held their rustle. The student's calm composure clashed against the owner's frenzy, and in that contrast, doubt began to creep into the watcher's eyes. The man's breath faltered. For a heartbeat, his anger wavered. But pride is a stubborn shield. He was still holding it, he stammered, voice weaker now. How do we know he wasn't about to? But the words rang hollow, their weight crumbling in the face of what everyone had just seen. The wallet was whole, untouched, its honesty laid bare for all to witness. The student said nothing still. His silence was no longer the silence of a boy accused. It was the silence of truth, undeniable and unmoved. He closed the wallet gently, his hand steady, his expression unreadable, and in that moment, though the man still scowled, though the whispers hadn't fully ceased, something in the air shifted. Suspicion no longer clung so tightly. Doubt began to change shape. The crowd was no longer certain of the villain in their midst. The park held its breath. The young student remained still, the wallet closed in his steady hand, while the accusing man loomed before him, face burning with fury and pride. Around them, the crowd pressed tighter, their silence heavier than the humid afternoon air. Suspicion still clung to the onlookers, though the proof of the untouched wallet had cracked its hold. The moment teetered, fragile, waiting for something or someone to tip the balance. Then, a voice rose from the edge of the circle, clear, calm, unshaken. Actually, I saw everything. The words rippled outward, heads turning toward the sound. A young woman stepped forward, her eyes firm, her phone raised high in her hand. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't uncertain. In her stance there was only quiet confidence, the kind that draws attention without demanding it. The accuser blinked at her, startled. "What are you talking about?" He barked, his voice cracking with sudden unease. "I've been recording," she said simply. She tilted the phone so the screen caught the light, its surface glowing faintly. From the moment he found it, a collective gasp fluttered through the crowd. The silence broke into murmurs, sharp and curious. People craned their necks to see. Suspicion shifted, its weight moving from the student to the man who had shouted. The woman tapped the screen, and a video began to play. The faint sound of wind and footsteps poured from the speaker. And there he was, the student bending near the bench, brushing leaves away, lifting the wallet as though it were something fragile. Every detail unfolded on the small glowing screen. The careful way he held it. The moment he paused, glancing around as though searching for the owner. The way he had walked openly, carrying the wallet in plain sight, never once slipping it into his pocket or hiding it beneath his books. His expression was visible, too thoughtful, almost solemn, as though he understood in that very moment that he carried More than just leather and cash. Gasps escaped from the crowd. A woman near the front muttered, "He didn't even hesitate." Another shook his head, whispering, "We judged too quickly." The accuser stepped back slightly, his jaw tightening. Color drained from his face, leaving him pale beneath the sweat. That doesn't prove," he tried to stammer. But the words faltered as the video continued. The recording showed the student stopping on the path, opening the wallet. Just enough to glimpse inside, then carefully closing it again, his hands steady, his movements deliberate. Not once did he take a bill, not once did he fumble with the cards. He had only tucked the folded note back in its place with almost reverent care, as though he already sensed the importance of what it held. The crowd's murmur grew louder, but the tone had changed. The sharp edge of suspicion dulled into shame. Faces turned away, eyes lowering. People who had whispered accusations minutes earlier now struggled to meet the student's gaze. The young woman's voice cut through again, calm but unyielding. "You accused him without knowing. But everyone can see now he never tried to steal. He was only holding it to return it." The silence that followed was different than before. No longer heavy with judgment, but with realization, thick with discomfort at their own assumptions. The student remained still, his expression quiet, unreadable, yet his composure carried more weight than any words could. The accusing man looked around wildly, as though searching for support, but found none. The crowd's eyes no longer burned toward the student, they burned toward him. His shoulders sagged, pride crumbling under the weight of truth. And in that moment, the balance shifted completely. The accused stood vindicated, his honesty illuminated for all to see. The accuser stood exposed, his prejudice laid bare. The wallet had not changed. The student had not changed. But the eyes of the crowd had. What moments ago had been doubt was now regret. What had been suspicion was now shame. That evening, as the sun dipped beyond the rooftops and the park emptied into quiet shadows, the story did not end where the student had stood. It followed him, carried in the glowing screen of a stranger's phone, traveling faster than footsteps. Could ever take him. By nightfall, the video had already spread across campus. By midnight, it had leapt beyond the university gates, making its way through timelines, group chats, and news feeds. What had been a tense, fleeting moment in the park was now replayed endlessly, frame by frame, pause by pause, for the world to see. The clip was simple. Just a young black student bending to pick up a wallet, brushing it free of dust, holding it with quiet care. Yet in its simplicity, it told a story more powerful than any headline. It showed his calm in the face of whispered suspicion. It showed his dignity as he opened the wallet before the crowd, revealing every untouched bill, every unbroken card, every folded note still in place. And it showed the moment the truth emerged, not through his defense, but through the witness, who captured what others chose not to see. The internet, often fickle and fleeting, seized on it with surprising force. Strangers flooded the comment sections where the video appeared. Some wrote of their shame, confessing how quickly they themselves might have judged him. Others praised his restraint, marveling at how he had endured accusation without anger, choosing silence over shouting, dignity over defense. He stood taller in silence than most of us could with words. One comment read, gathering thousands of likes. Another echoed, "This is what integrity looks like, not just telling the truth, but living it under pressure." Soon, hashtags began to spread, lifting his story into the wider public eye. News outlets picked it up, blogs dissected it, and strangers shared it with captions like "Faith in Humanity Restored," and proof that character shines under judgment. His face, once just another among hundreds on a campus, became a symbol of honesty under fire. Meanwhile, the man who had accused him, sweating, frantic, red-faced in the video, did not escape the internet's eye. His words, "You were trying to steal it," were replayed just as often as the students. Calm silence. Within days, his name surfaced, and so did a tidal wave of criticism. His pride, once a shield, now crumbled under the public glare. At first, he resisted, offering excuses, claiming misunderstanding, but eventually, the pressure mounted too high. He issued a public apology, an awkward video filmed in his living room, his voice subdued. He admitted he had been wrong, that he had judged too quickly, that fear had driven his accusation. But the internet has a way of remembering not apologies, but impressions. And in every replay of that afternoon, what lingered most was not the man's voice, but the student's silence, the calm steadiness of a young man who refused to be shaken by prejudice. For the student, life did not change overnight. He still carried his books across campus, still walked the same park path on his way home. But strangers began to recognize him. Some approached with handshakes, others with quiet words of gratitude, a few even with letters of encouragement. It was as though the dignity he had shown in that single moment had given voice to something larger than himself. He had not asked to be a symbol. He had only chosen to do what was right. Yet now, his choice carried weight beyond his own steps, echoing in the minds of thousands who watched, who judged, and who, in the end, were humbled by the truth. And so the story of that afternoon did not fade into silence. It lived on in glowing screens and shared words, in the quiet apologies of strangers, and in the steady respect that grew around his name. He was no longer seen as a suspect. He was remembered as a reminder that even under pressure, honesty could not be hidden. The following day, the park looked the same as it always did, sunlight spilling over the benches, children's laughter skipping across the grass, the rustle of trees whispering in the warm afternoon air. Life moved on as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet, somewhere far beyond the quiet paths and shaded corners, the story of a young student had already traveled across thousands of screens and into countless conversations. The video that captured his calmness under accusation continued to spread, and with it came reflection. People who had never set foot in that park, who had never met the young man, found themselves pausing at the image of him standing silently, wallet in hand, dignity intact despite the weight of suspicion pressing down on him. And so the narrator's voice lingers in thought. True integrity, after all, does not wait for applause. It does not ask for trust before it acts. Integrity lives in the choices we make when no one is watching, or worse, when everyone is watching but expecting the worst of us. The young student could have walked away. He could have hidden the wallet. He could have argued, shouted back, let anger take over when the man accused him. Yet he did none of those things. He chose stillness. He chose honesty. Sometimes, honesty is not tested by the temptation of money or the pull of greed. No, sometimes it is tested in far crueler ways, in the gaze of strangers who doubt your worth, in the whispers that assume the worst simply because of who you are, in the accusations that cut deeper than theft itself. The student did not fight those assumptions with loud words. He fought them with patience, with an unshaken truth that needed no defense. And when the weight of prejudice met the light of his honesty, the truth did what it always does. It rose. It rose in the clear evidence of a recording, in the shame that flushed across the accuser's face, in the shift of a crowd that suddenly saw themselves mirrored in their own suspicion. They had judged, and they had been wrong. He had endured, and he had been right. The lesson lingered not in the apology. That came later, but in the moment itself, in the sight of a young man refusing to bend beneath the pressure of doubt. For it is one thing to be honest when the world praises you for it. It is another thing entirely to be honest when the world accuses you, when every eye expects betrayal, when your silence must carry more weight than another's shouting. And yet he bore it, calmly, firmly, without losing himself. In that choice, his story became larger than one wallet, one man, one afternoon. It became a lesson to strangers watching through their phones late at night, to students sitting in their dorms, to parents showing their children what courage looks like. It became a reminder that honesty is not fragile, it does not wither under suspicion. Instead, it grows brighter, sharper, stronger when tested against doubt. The young black student did not set out to become a symbol. He was simply walking home after class. But fate placed a test in his path, and in answering it with dignity, he gave the world something greater than a story. He gave them a truth to carry forward, that honesty, when held with courage, can outshine even the darkest assumptions. And in the quiet of the park, where sunlight touched the benches and laughter carried on the breeze, the world seemed just a little brighter, because one young man had chosen to do what was right, even when no one believed he would.